Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Dutch. So earlier this month, I did a video called 5 Great Thanksgiving Movies. For anyone who hasn't seen it and is interested, I'll put it in the description below. And the first movie that came to my head, which is kind of the first movie that comes to most people's heads whenever they think about Thanksgiving classic movies, because there really aren't that many of them, is of course Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It's a movie that isn't just a great Thanksgiving movie or a great holiday movie. It's a great movie, period. In fact, it's one of my personal favorites. I'd go as far as to say that it's probably John Hughes's greatest film as both a writer and a director, with Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off coming in at a very close second. But it's a movie that I look forward to watching every year, especially because there isn't that many Thanksgiving movies to revisit. But then I found out, like a few years ago, I watched a video by All Hats Entertainment called Almost Cult Classics. It talked about a movie called Dutch, which is a movie that I had never heard before. And it was a movie that was written by John Hughes, starring Ed O'Neill. And I'm, big fan of John Hughes, big fan of Ed O'Neill, specifically that of Modern Family. I absolutely love his character as Jay, and I think he's hysterical on that show. So I was like, hey, I'm looking forward to this. Hopefully I can find a movie that I'll want to revisit every year, similar to that of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And
you hurt her and I'll hit you so fucking hard your dog will bleed, okay?
That doesn't make sense.
This movie's bad. This is a really bad movie. And I do find it kind of strange that it has kind of gained somewhat of a cult following from people. I was looking at reviews on Letterboxd and IMDb before I decided to watch the movie, because the movie had bad reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. 17% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's very, very low. But something like 63, 64% on the audience side of the meter. And I was like, okay. And I was looking up some reviews, and a lot of people are like, oh, this movie is super underrated. The critics got it wrong. It's funny. It's heartfelt. It's a wonderful, cozy little movie that's similar to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot. Okay, first of all, this movie is the anti-Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, in that Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is actually funny and heartwarming and endearing and is wonderful to watch during the holiday season. This movie is none of that. It's not funny. It's not endearing. All of the forced sentimentality in this movie comes off phony as shit. Ed O'Neill gives a god-awful performance, as does the child actor Ethan Randall, who would go on to be in a bunch of other stuff, movies like That Thing You Do, Can't Hardly Wait, Sweet Home Alabama. He's one of those actors where you see in a bunch of stuff. I didn't even recognize him. I was like, oh, I looked it up and I was like, it's that guy. He's really bad in this movie, and even worse, the chemistry between both of them is non-existent. There's no good comedic chemistry, and everything feels forced and terrible and just no. As I'm talking about this movie, I'm obviously going to talk about it in contrast with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, because it's essentially the same concept, where two people who don't get along need to go cross country together in order to make it home for Thanksgiving dinner. That's the overall premise of both of these movies. Obviously, some details are changed, where Ed O'Neill is dating the mother of this kid, and Ed O'Neill, his character, is named Dutch, and the kid is named Doyle. And so he is tasked by the mother to go pick up the kid in Georgia who lives at a private school, get him home to Thanksgiving, and that's the premise. And similar to that of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, things go awry. Things go bad. They don't get along. They get involved in crazy, outlandish situations, but then they learn to love each other and respect each other. And it's so beautiful and endearing, except it's not. It's terrible in this movie. And the movie ends happily ever after with a nice, playful, comedic joke about Ed O'Neill shooting the kid with the BB gun to pay back him shooting him with the BB gun earlier in the movie. That's basically the plot of the movie. It's not that original, so already the movie just doesn't feel that fresh in comparison to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which at the time that movie was kind of a fresh, original idea that's been reattempted in other comedies. Another movie that pops into my mind is Due Date with Robert Downey Jr. and Zach Galifianakis, a movie that has some fun comedic stuff, but is also not a very good movie. But of course, what makes Planes, Trains, and Automobiles work brilliantly is Steve Martin and John Candy. They play both of their roles perfectly. But the other thing that's kind of incredible about that movie is that even though they don't get along a lot during that movie and they butt heads, you can understand both characters' point of view in terms of why they aren't getting along. Steve Martin, his character is desperate to get home for the holidays. He doesn't want to have chit chat with people. He doesn't want to make friends. He just wants to go home, and things keep getting in the way of that. John Candy, we find out at the end of the movie that he doesn't really have a home to go to, and he's just trying to be a friendly guy, but he keeps kind of accidentally overstepping his bounds and ends up irritating Steve Martin. And we understand where Steve Martin's coming from, but we also understand where John Candy's coming from. And that is essential to that movie. It's essential to understanding the characters, to liking the characters, and to making the comedy work, because you can kind of see both points of view, and it's brilliant. And John Candy is one of those actors where he was a very special actor. I love John Candy with all my heart. Uncle Buck is another movie that I absolutely adore, and he just has this uncanny ability to be lovable, and it comes off as effortless. Ed O'Neill is not that kind of actor. He just isn't. He's most famous outside of Modern Family for being the dad with Married with Children. He's gruff, he's crass, he's crude. His character is sort of kind of like a version of that in this movie. But it just doesn't work. It comes off as genuinely mean-spirited and just off-putting. I'll give you an example. There's numerous scenes in this movie where Dutch is getting fed up with Doyle. And so he tries to teach him a lesson. One of those ways where he leaves him out in the middle of nowhere during the winter, forcing him to walk 50 miles to the motel room because the kid is acting like such a jerk to him. That scene could be funny, but in the movie, it feels very sad. The kid, there's somber music playing. The kid is alone and scared, and he tries to call his mom, and then he hangs up, and it's like, is this supposed to be funny? Are we supposed to feel sympathy for the kid? Because here's the other problem with the movie. We look at the kid from this movie, and he's established from the very beginning to be just an unbelievable dick. This kid is snarky, he's unlikable, he's arrogant, and there's no real sympathetic quality to him. We get the sense that he's upset that he's at this private school, and he's upset that his parents are separating, and I can understand that. But there's no heart to his character. There's no heart to Ed O'Neill's character. There's no heart in this movie, but it tries to convince you that there is. And we'll get to the moments of forced sentimentality here in a minute. But other scenes that try to play off as comedic that just feels off-putting is, for example, when Dutch straight up kidnaps the kid. He hog-ties him on his hockey stick. Meant to be funny. The way it's directed, which I should point out, this movie isn't directed by John Hughes. It's directed by Peter Feynman, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, who's only directed one other movie, Crocodile Dundee, a movie that I saw years ago that I don't really remember other than That's Not a Knife. So he directed this movie, and the way he directs the comedy in this movie is a great example of how you don't direct comedies. There's a disconnect between the direction and the script in this movie. But I'm not letting John Hughes off the hook either, because the script in this movie is terrible. It's just a half-assed version of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but with even less comedy and less heart and less likability and less anything that makes a movie enjoyable. I mean, this movie is just a miserable film. He hog-ties the kid, throws him in the back of the seat, and it's meant to be funny. Once again, comes off as weird and off-putting and not that funny. There's also a scene where they go to have breakfast, and the kid's being snide to Ed O'Neill, so he really shows the kid by him paying for breakfast and not giving the kid breakfast, so starving the child, leaving the child. He puts his hands on the kid multiple times in the movie, pushes him around and stuff, and it's like, you're a piece of shit. Ed O'Neill is he's deplorable in this movie, but also the kid is a piece of shit too. So it's like, there's no win-win. There's no understanding where these characters are coming from in the same sense that we saw in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, where we can sympathize and we get it. But I don't get it with these two characters. I just don't. And on top of that, it's just not funny. There's so many attempts at humor in this movie, so many lowbrow, eye-rolling attempts of, oh, look, Ed O'Neill is playing with fireworks and the scene is going on for an obnoxious amount of time. Why is the scene going on for so fucking long? I don't know, but I'm watching it with this face the whole time. Oh, it's still going. Oh, it's still not funny. And there's so many moments like that throughout this movie. There's a scene where, you know, Ed O'Neill slips and a shoe hits his head.
Oh my God, that is funny!
It feels desperate. The comedy feels desperate in this movie because there's nothing to work with. There's another scene where Ed O'Neill's bed in a homeless shelter. Yeah, they end up going to a homeless shelter because the kid steals his car. The car gets wrecked, and now they have to figure out how to go to Chicago without a car. And so they end up at a homeless shelter after things go awry with prostitutes. There's also a great, super funny scene where a grown adult prostitute is, you know, biting her lip and playing with her hair while looking at this little boy, and then he's infatuated with her, and then he puts his face on her tits in the back of the car. Yeah, that's not creepy at all. I'm kidding. That's super goddamn creepy. And then once they're at the homeless shelter, there's a great gag. It's absolutely hysterical of Ed O'Neill's bed breaking and then him having to fix it, and then it breaks again, and that's so funny, right?
Oh my God, that is funny!
No, it's not funny. Didn't laugh once. Did not laugh once. There's also another creepy scene where Ed O'Neill is showing the kid porn cards, and the camera's like looking at his face, and his face is like, he comes off as a fucking creep. A creepo, weirdo, jackass is how he comes off throughout this whole movie. And then we get to the moments of forced sentimentality, which is just an eye roll because it feels so unearned. And I don't like any of these characters, so even if they do end up being friends, it's like, I don't care. I don't care. Where you go to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and it's like there's that wonderful scene where our characters have been through so much. They almost died, their car set on fire, and they go to the hotel, and they end up drinking, and it's like the first time that Steve Martin actually, you know, is kind of vulnerable and is willing to laugh at the bullshit he's experienced, and him and John Candy have a heart-to-heart, and it feels earned, it feels natural, it feels heartwarming, and it's wonderful. This movie attempts to have scenes like that, but no. Just no. And I'm baffled that there are people who defend this movie. They're like, this movie's hilarious. I saw somebody, I shit you not, I saw somebody on Letterboxd say, I like this movie better than Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Obviously, people can have their opinions, like whatever you want. At the end of the day, I don't really care, but it's interesting to me that I feel so just the 100% opposite of that. I can't even, like, the fact that people think that this is even on par with that movie is crazy to me. But even if I take away Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, if I separate that movie entirely, this movie still doesn't work. It still doesn't feel fresh. It's still not funny. It's still not charming or heartwarming. It's mean-spirited. It's desperate with its comedy. It's also kind of creepy in moments with its comedy, and it's heavy-handed and forced with its sentimentality and its bullshit commentary on classism, which once again just feels so heavy-handed and just phony. So yeah, I hate this movie. I hated this movie. I think it's terrible. And I'm sure I'm going to get quite a bit of comments telling me that I'm an idiot or I'm being too harsh on this movie or whatever. I'm curious to see the feedback I will get, but I want to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think. Do you think I'm completely missing this movie? Am I getting it wrong? Or do you agree with me? Mention in the comments below. All I ask is don't be a dick about it. We can be civil and disagree and like different things. But let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.